would have been laid on top of the coffin as it was processed through the streets of London or Windsor. And actually we still have most of those funeral effigies in Westminster Abbey, and as well as telling us what monarchs centuries ago actually looked like, they also reveal telling details such as Mary I's swollen stomach. She believed she was pregnant and actually she had a tumour. And also Edward III's face shows that he probably died of a stroke. So these effigies are remarkable pieces of history, and they were a tradition from the 14th century onwards, but sort of died out a couple of centuries ago.
Now, the strains of those bagpipes are giving us a sense of the enormous military procession that's going to be escorting the gun carriage bearing the Queen's coffin through the streets of London. A great honour, of course, for the members of the armed forces who will be accompanying the cortege of their former Commander-in-Chief. With me now is Colonel David Hanna, who as Brigade Major of the Household Division was part of the team planning and organising the military aspects of today's procession. And David, it's very hard to convey the sense of the scale of what we're about to see. We went to watch the rehearsal, the dress rehearsal, as part of our preparations for today, and I couldn't believe how long it took for it to go past us.
Certainly, Martha, I would agree that the scale is unlikely to be repeated, so is likely to be unique in many respects. But to refer back to what we were saying previously about the Earl Marshal responsible for planning all of this, I was struck when, along with my team, attending the annual planning meetings for the London Bridge operations.
We should explain that London Bridge is
the overall planning.
Yeah.
And the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, would emphasise the scale. And it is extraordinary now, a few years later, to see how all this is being materialised. And the numbers speak for themselves. We have on parade today some 4,000 servicemen and women who are, and those are the ones just you will see, shall we say, on parade. That doesn't include the large numbers of vitally important support personnel, the behind-the-scenes team that make it all happen and without whom it would not happen. But I would also perhaps add that of the 4,000 on parade today, it's 3,000 in London and about 1,000 in Windsor. There's nothing superfluous. These are the ones who are required to do the job in the right way, as befits the state funeral for our monarch, but with one other important factor. All the troops on parade today come from regiments, ships, or parts of the Air Force, which have a personal association with the Queen. And that is the reason why they have been chosen to do the jobs they are doing.
She might have been Colonel-in-Chief of their regiment.
Correct. And by doing that, we are all very consciously representing all our colleagues throughout the armed forces, because she was the Commander-in-Chief of all the armed forces.
And I also wanted you to explain the background behind some of the traditions we're going to be seeing today. Particularly, we've been talking about the sailors pulling the gun carriage. That'll be a truly memorable sight.
It will be, and as with many traditions, there are different accounts of how it came about. I heard the Chief of Defence Staff talking about it a while ago, and he made the point that it comes from concern that the horses originally charged to do the job for Queen Victoria. There was concern that they might spook and disrupt the procession. There may well be some truth in that. There is also the theory that at the time of Queen Victoria's procession was also shortly after the Boer War, and there was a famous event in the Boer War when sailors were used to dismantle guns from battleships and transport them across really difficult terrain, mountain terrain, etc., in order to support the army on operations. And that involved pulling gun carriages using ropes, and in some respects there may be a reference, particularly for Queen Victoria, using sailors doing that would have resonated with much of the audience of the day.
And there will be particular focus, won't there, on the bearer party?
There will, quite rightly, and in many ways the bearer party reflect one of the closest relationships between the armed services and the Queen, in that the bearer party are carefully selected from the Queen's company of the Grenadier Guards. They are selected. There's a very practical aspect. They need to be tall and strong, because it's a lead-lined coffin, and clearly the individuals are selected carefully. But above all, it reflects that relationship of the Queen and her relationship with the Queen's company, and it is the company colour that we saw being positioned carefully on the catafalque the other day, and we will see that company colour again at the latter part of today's ceremonies.
So a huge honour and, of course, a responsibility. David and Tracy, for the moment, thank you. Let's go back now to Westminster Abbey, where the guests are continuing to arrive, and we can talk to Chris Mason. And obviously there have been a lot of political guests been invited today.
Yes, good morning to you, Martha. I've just walked around the corner from Tothill Street, overlooking the west door of Westminster Abbey. Now behind me, the Queen Elizabeth II Conference Centre, and in front of me, a patch of grass, a sign describing it as United Nations Green. Now, the actual United Nations, its General Assembly, is gathering in New York in the coming days, but this feels like the real thing, for the world arrives here in the next hour or so. And in a postcode, Westminster, rightly known for its volume, for its arguments, the noisy industry of democracy, today, save for the bells of course and the ceremony to come, a peace, a quiet, a reflection to mark this constitutional chapter change. Scaffolding, camera lights, satellite trucks, lanyards, accreditations and security all in front of me. Arriving shortly, the very vocabulary of power, emperors and kings, presidents and prime ministers, and the world's media with those lights and cameras and reporters keen to capture it and beam it around the world. This has been, as we've been reflecting, a huge challenge to the state, to the civil service, the largest single event the UK has hosted in decades, possibly ever. And yes, it's been in the planning for years, but it's all happened within 10 days notice, the equivalent of setting up hundreds of state visits in just 2 weeks. And I think, Martha, while of course it's our journalistic duty to probe, to question, to scrutinise, we should also point out where plans work, where big logistical organisational plans work, and that's what we're seeing here today.
Thank you, Chris. And if you're wondering, the bell we're hearing is the tenor bell at Westminster Abbey, which is going to be tolling for every year of the Queen's life. Now, we've been hearing about the great and the good, I suppose, who are going to be inside the Abbey, but I wonder how people who are currently lining the streets are feeling. At George VI's funeral, one reporter described the crowd as solid, courageous, but tired people, and I'm sure that still holds today. Many of them have camped overnight. Adele Roberts is on the Mall.
Thank you, Martha. Yes, I've been speaking to quite a few people today and it's been very touching. It's currently a very respectful atmosphere here, but also really gentle and calm and friendly, and at moments celebratory, filled with gratitude. There's been lots of applause for the police, security staff, road sweepers, just everyone helping to make today happen. So I'm midway down the Mall, a huge sweeping road that runs from Trafalgar Square right up to the gates of Buckingham Palace, and most recently home to the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. In the upcoming weeks, it will be the finish line of the London Marathon, but today it forms part of the route as we say goodbye to our late Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. And here in front of me, a group of people who have met overnight and made friends. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So Alison, I feel like there's a real feeling of togetherness today, and I think it's really moving to see the range of people that are here.
Yeah, it's been totally amazing. Arrived yesterday at 3 o'clock. Didn't know any of these people around us. We've all made friends, and it was a fantastic night. But we're ready now for a very emotional day ahead of us.
Absolutely. And Joanna, you're not only here together as a new family, but you're representing maybe people that couldn't make the trip themselves.
So that's the view from the Mall. Let me turn to my guests again in the studio. And David Hanno, you were talking about the honour, the responsibility of the military involved. Will there be nerves as well?
There are sure to be. And I would have thought that is true from the most senior, the Major General, who holds the responsibility, to the Earl Marshal, the delegated responsibility for the execution of the plan of the military ceremonial, right the way through to the likes of the Garrison Sergeant Major. But I think, and I would hope, that with everyone, those nerves will be balanced with the professional experience that will allow everyone to steady down and to make sure that the focus is on doing the best job that everyone possibly can for our Commander-in-Chief.
You're listening to BBC Radio as we bring you coverage of the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. The lying in state has been taking place in Westminster Hall for 4 days. In just over an hour, the coffin will be removed from the purple platform, the catafalque we've come to know in recent days, and be taken on a short journey to Westminster Abbey for the funeral service, which will begin at 11 o'clock. At around midday, the mile-long procession will start its journey through Ceremonial London, ending at Wellington Arch on Hyde Park Corner. From there, the coffin will travel to Windsor before a second procession through Windsor Great Park and into the castle. And then at 4 o'clock, a service of committal will take place at St George's Chapel in the grounds of the castle. And finally, at 7:30 tonight, there'll be a private burial service attended only by the King and members of the royal family. As we speak, the King is at Clarence House, his home in London as Prince of Wales. Nuala McGovern is there for us. Good morning, Nuala.
Good morning, Martha, to you and to your guests. Yes, we are here on the Mall. Looking ahead, I see Clarence House, and this, as you mentioned, has been the home for King Charles III and Queen Consort Camilla for almost 20 years now. But this is, of course, such a monumental morning. We are looking in. There's been quite a little bit of action this morning with cars coming and going in and out, but we believe that King Charles III stayed there last night. Also, the Prince of Wales, Prince William, and the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry. So we are watching their movements this morning. To my left is Buckingham Palace. It's really just a short walk away, and of course that is where the King hosted more than 200 members of foreign dignitaries that came to pay their respects to the royal family. And the King also issued a statement of thanks before the funeral, as he wanted to really speak to the people. And I have to say, the scale of the number of people that surround me here right now is something to behold. Maybe 20, 25 deep outside Clarence House. Let me read you a little of what the King said. He said, "As we prepare to say the last farewell, I wanted to say thank you to all those countless people who have been such a support and comfort to my family and myself in this time of grief." And I think it sums up just what people have wanted to hear. I'm speaking to some of them that have been here for over 24 hours, maybe 36 hours, tired and subdued, but have made their spot here beside me because they want to catch a glimpse of King Charles III and his family before they make their way to the funeral.
And Nuala, we've learnt that children from the royal family are going to be involved today. Prince George and Princess Charlotte will also be part of today's event.
They will indeed. The second and third in line to the throne. They will walk in procession behind the Queen's coffin as it's carried by the military bearer party. Their grandfather with the Queen Consort will be immediately behind the coffin. They will be with their parents. We do know they're just 9 and 7 years of age. Obviously this huge event that they're involved in. And we also know that Prince George always called his beloved great-grandmother Gan Gan. And I think it'll be a very moving moment, and to see them take part with their families, with their mother, father, and also their uncles and grandfather and all around them. We do also believe they will go to the committal service this evening in Windsor. Their younger brother, Prince Louis, will not take part in any of those ceremonies, but we do expect members of the royal family to proceed to the Palace of Westminster from this point, from Clarence House, in the coming hour.
And as you say, giving a really strong sense that this is a family funeral too. The King, as Nuala told us, is at Clarence House. Other members of the royal family are gathering at Buckingham Palace. James Kumarasamy is there. Just give us a sense of what's going to be happening at the palace this morning.
Yes, hello Martha. At about 10:25 or so, 4 cars will leave the palace with senior members of the royal family, including the Duke of York, the Earl of Wessex, Princess Royal and her husband Vice Admiral Tim Lawrence. They'll be heading to the Palace of Westminster as well. Now, the area just in front of the palace gates, which has been a place of public pilgrimage for the past 10 days, has been cleared, has been swept clean, and the royal standard is hanging limp now over a building where, as Nuala mentioned, King Charles last night hosted more than 200 heads of state at that reception. Now, unlike her eldest son, the late Queen wasn't born in Buckingham Palace, but she was christened in its private chapel. And throughout her 70 years on the throne, the rooms behind this Portland stone facade were where she usually conducted the business of state. Of course, many of her most memorable public images were framed against a single background, that famous balcony, which is just about level with my eye line today. From 19-year-old Princess Elizabeth greeting the exuberant crowds on VE Day with her parents, her sister, and Winston Churchill, to her coronation in 1953, the succession of royal weddings, and those unforgettable scenes just over 3 months ago of her late Majesty in a bright green coat, thrilling and surprising the crowds at the end of her Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Well, later today, when the Queen's coffin passes here, the detachment of the King's Guard, the troops on duty at Buckingham Palace, will give a royal salute in the palace forecourt, a farewell to a monarch whom generations of guards have protected over the decades.
Thank you, James. And we've been hearing about the crowds on the Mall. Nuala said they were 25 deep. And in fact, we've just heard that the processional viewing areas are now full. There's no entry for new arrivals. Now, our royal correspondent, Johnny Diamond, is still with us. And Johnny, a day of national mourning, of course. We're burying a monarch. But for the royal family, for the King, it's going to be a day of very personal loss.
It will be a day of personal loss, and a day, of course, of high ceremony. He will walk behind the coffin as it goes into the Abbey. He will sit through the service. He will walk behind the coffin as it makes its way through central London, as it makes its way to Hyde Park Corner, where it will be transferred to the State Hearse. And he's had such a punishing schedule over the past 10 days already. I followed him round for some of it. It is worth remembering. He is a man in his early 70s who has lost his mother and has taken the crown. He mourns as a son. He leads the nation in mourning, and at the same time he takes on the responsibilities of state. Many of those are generally below the surface. You could call them the iceberg responsibilities. You see so little of them. We've seen a fair amount of them, or heard about a fair amount of them these past 10 days. Audiences with the Prime Minister and First Ministers, meetings with the heads of the military, state papers, and more and more. Once already, as I say, he has walked behind his mother's coffin. Again, he will do that today. An extraordinary time for him, one he has thought about, prepared for, no doubt, for many years, but nothing can be like the experience that he has had over the past 10 days and what he will go through here in Westminster today.
And perhaps nobody could have prepared for the outpouring of grief and gratitude that we've seen in recent days, and the King has expressed his thanks for that, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. He put out a short statement on Sunday evening, effectively, as you say, simply thanking the people of the United Kingdom for the outpouring that they have made, the outpouring of thanks and of remembrance and, of course, of mourning for the Queen. It wasn't a huge statement, it wasn't effusive, but it looked extraordinarily sincere. And again, seeing him these past few days, he is a son in mourning, and he is clearly touched by the response he has seen so often as he has gone into the crowds and talked with them and shook their hands and taken their sadness with him.
Well, let me bring in our royal historian, Tracy Borman, now. Most of us have never seen the transition from one monarch to another, have we?
We haven't, and I'm reminded of a quote from the time of Queen Victoria's death in 1901, when a contemporary said the vast majority of her subjects had never known a time when the Queen had not been reigning over them. And of course those words have resonated over the past 10 days or so. This is a truly historic moment, the longest reigning monarch in British history. Elizabeth II broke all sorts of other records, and her funeral is set to do so today too.
And she clearly inspired a great deal of loyalty from her team. We can talk now to Sally Osman, who is Director of Royal Communications at Buckingham Palace for 6 years until 2019. Good morning, Sally. You obviously worked very closely with the Queen. You would call her your boss. What was she like to work with?
Well, she was terrific. I mean, she was an exemplary boss in some ways, and a role model and an inspiration for female leaders the world over.
And you described her at one point as shy, which some people might be surprised about.
Now, I think a lot of people who knew her well knew that she was reasonably, that she was quite shy, which is, there's a deep irony there, isn't there, for one of the most famous women in the world. Sorry, we're just being moved out of the way at the moment, so apologies for that.
No, I'm sure there's a lot of security.
Yes, there is. They're doing a grand job. It was, so she was quite shy, but she managed to find ways of getting around that, and that was usually by putting people at their ease and being very intuitive and realising just how nervous people could be. And she would automatically shake their hand, ask them the famous question, where have you come from? But actually often make a wry comment that would make them laugh and put them at their ease. And she was a dab hand at that. But I think she conquered her shyness in some respects, and but that's why she enjoyed her privacy as well, and her times away from the big affairs of state, etc.
And the handbags helped, I gather.
Yeah, the handbags. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, what did the Queen keep in her handbag? Well, now we know in terms of
marmalade sandwich.
But of course, she would have a handkerchief. She would have her lipstick, which I think a lot of women will empathise with this. She managed to apply lipstick without a mirror immaculately, and that was also apparently a sign to her staff, whether it's her ladies in waiting or her private secretary or whoever was with her, that it was time to go. So there was symbolism buried in that handbag.
There's a kind of armour in a way, if you like.
Yes.
Samantha Cohen, who I know you also worked with at the Palace, has described her as the most normal, non-normal person I've ever met.
That's yes, Sam and I worked very closely together, and she was, in a way, because the conversation with her would vary from how are you, how is the family, what's going on, and she always wanted to know what was going on, whether it was good or bad. She'd rather know than not know, but also it would then veer up to the great affairs of state, whether they be crises, forthcoming state visits, whatever it might be. So a conversation with the Queen could span from the normal day-to-day right up to very big global events.
Now, we know for an event of this scale, of course, there have been detailed funeral plans for some time, based in part on funerals of the past. How involved was the Queen herself in any of that, do you think?
Well, I think out of respect to the Queen, a lot of the planning was done sort of out of ear shot. But, you know, inevitably she was also an incredibly pragmatic person. So she knew what was going on and would have a view on things as well. So she would be involved at particular times. But we always used to have an annual meeting with the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk. Every year, January, before she came back from Sandringham, there'd be a very big meeting in the ballroom at Buckingham Palace with everybody who was involved, all the people you are now seeing, you know, playing at the very top of their game, from the police to the transport people to the military to some of the overseas the Commonwealth countries. You know, anybody who was going to be involved in this massive operation would come to that meeting for updates and briefings about what was happening, ideas that had changed, because they were always evolving.
Always evolving, that's something we've learned, haven't we? And what about any personal touches? Can you detect any of those?
Well, I think in the hymns that we're going to hear today, you know, the hymn that was played at her wedding, there is one of the early psalms, I think, that is an exact mirror of what happened at the Queen Mother's funeral. So there are sort of references and touches that, you know, are relevant to the Queen herself. And I think we saw it most poignantly in Balmoral when she, in terms of the flowers, the piper piping her out at Balmoral, and the gamekeepers who would have carried the coffin. Those were deeply, deeply personal touches, but there are still a few in this massive state funeral we're about to see, and at St George's later.
We'll be looking out for those. Sally Osman, many thanks. Now, Thanks, Sally. Now, just to explain, there are going to be 2 processions in London this morning. The first from Westminster Hall to the Abbey, and then there's the second from there to Wellington Arch. Both will go through Parliament Square, the heart of UK public life. John Murray has the view across that whole scene.
And here on the corner of Parliament Square, I was treated earlier to a wonderful, brief orange sunrise away beyond the Shard. But now the skies are as grey as the plinth of Churchill's statue, which is just to my left. From here, I will watch the gun carriage pulled through Carriage Gate, almost directly opposite me, and into and around Parliament Square towards Westminster Abbey, led there by the massed pipes and drums, which will be a stirring scene. And then after the state funeral at the Abbey, it's here we'll begin to get an idea of the sheer size and scale of the full procession, which will be formed in 7 groups, all accompanied by a band or combined bands, and it'll stretch away from here all the way down Whitehall and beyond. And it's as the procession leaves Parliament Square, behind the barriers to my left, the crowds start to line the route. People have taken up positions on the ground floor windowsills of the Treasury building. All of the tents of those who slept out overnight have been packed away now, and they're all waiting, Union flags at the ready, to be part of scenes that have not been witnessed for generations.
From Parliament Square, the procession will move up Whitehall to pass the Cenotaph, and there are going to be so many moments today, aren't there, which are going to inspire memories of the Queen during her lifetime. And here I think we're bound to remember her laying wreaths at Remembrance Day over so many years. Witnessing events there for us today is Mike Costello.
And barely a breeze blowing along Whitehall so far today. The flags on this east side of the Cenotaph resting virtually still. This a focal point in the early stage of the procession, the monument to Britain's fallen in 2 world wars and other conflicts. And from the Cenotaph, the procession moves on past Downing Street to the Women of World War II Memorial, unveiled by the Queen in 2005. All of those important, significant landmarks in her life and her reign. The crowds here are dense on both sides of the road. They began forming as early as yesterday morning, people setting up tents to secure prime positions. And when we arrived here at 6:30 today, there was an announcement requesting that those tents be taken down, as John Murray has just said, to make room for more spectators. The atmosphere here, as we've heard elsewhere along the route today, warm, respectful, people at the front of the crowd here talking to police officers on the other side of the barriers, the officers stationed at roughly 10 metres or so apart all the way along Whitehall, which also formed part of the procession route for the funerals of Her late Majesty's parents, King George VI in 1952 and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, in 2002. Some of the people here passing the time chatting to others in the crowd as they wait for the procession to file past, following the service, the sound of which will be relayed along here in Whitehall.
And we're hearing the sounds of some of the bands now leaving Wellington Barracks to get into position. Let's continue on the ceremonial route, where the procession moves through those famous arches where tourists come to see guards in full dress uniform. The arches lead from Whitehall into the large ceremonial square of Horse Guards Parade. Emma Barnett's there.
Good morning, Martha, and to everyone listening. Yes, here at Horse Guards Parade, in so many ways, the military heart of ceremonial London, a site we know well, particularly because of the Queen. Every year, the stage set to mark her official birthday and life in June with Trooping the Colour. Today, the military, I can see from our studio in the trees, her family, and the crowds 20 deep in places, and they're ready to pay tribute to her life on her final journey. And we can also see out of some of these buildings surrounding this parade ground, people are looking through the windows, ready for the procession. The Queen's coffin will come through the narrow Horse Guards Arch to the centre of the parade ground before turning down the Mall, and the King's Lifeguard will give a royal salute to the coffin as the procession moves. The King's Lifeguard is conducted by soldiers of the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment. Horse Guards is named after the troops who have mounted the King's Lifeguard here since the restoration of King Charles II in 1660. Every weekday, whatever the season or weather, members of the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment ride down from Hyde Park Barracks in Knightsbridge to take over guard duties here at 11 a.m. for the next 24 hours. But today, this famous parade ground with its yellow gravel, surrounded by statues of military figures and war memorials, and edged by the back wall of number 10 Downing Street's garden, is ready for the procession of the Queen's coffin.
And that tenor bell still tolling from Westminster Abbey 96 times for every year of the Queen's life. Now, the procession is going to be moving from Horse Guards Parade, as Emma described, to the Mall, close to Admiralty Arch, that great London landmark which leads into Trafalgar Square. And that's where Ken Bruce is for us today. Good morning, Ken.
Morning, Martha. Thank you. Yes, Admiralty Arch, commissioned by Edward VII in memory of Queen Victoria, but completed after his death in 1912. Been here 110 years. And it stands as the kind of gateway between Trafalgar Square and the public part of ceremonial London, the Mall. 0.5 nautical miles in length from the arch to the Queen Victoria Memorial at Buckingham Palace. The procession will come up Horse Guards Road, which is directly in front of where I am at the moment. It will then wheel left and process along the Mall for that half mile. And at all points of that distance, those in the procession will be able to see ahead of them the facade of Buckingham Palace. Now, even at this late stage, preparations have been continuing this morning. A little earlier, I saw 3 army personnel out with pace sticks, these kind of dividers, walking sticks, which make the final measurements to ensure the procession is timed to perfection, as we're sure it will be. Here at the Mall, police officers in ceremonial dress, wearing white gloves and full medals, are lining the route facing the people who have arrived here in huge numbers. Some have camped for days, as we've heard, their tents now safely away, but all of them prepared for a memorable day.
And you'll be enjoying, Ken, I'm sure, hearing the massed pipe and drum band, the bagpipes playing there. Now, from outside Buckingham Palace, the procession made up of military from the UK and Commonwealth accompanying the cortege, funeral marches playing, will make its way along Green Park to one of London's distinctive landmarks, Wellington Arch on Hyde Park Corner. That'll be around 1 o'clock. James Knockley's there.
Martha, hello, from Wellington Arch at the top of Constitution Hill, as you say, and here we'll witness the Queen's farewell to London. Across this street, the site of her childhood home on Piccadilly, in a stone's throw, really, from the gardens of Buckingham Palace. And when the long procession reaches the arch here, it's the monument to victory at Waterloo, of course, the coffin is going to be lifted from the gun carriage, and the ceremonial part of the funeral will, in effect, be over. The bands will play, and I should tell you that just in front of me, the President of the United States is going past in the Beast, the famous car, and in a massive, long parade round, at least I do, yes, it is the Beast. He's heading round Hyde Park Corner, down towards and go along Birdcage Walk, and will arrive in Parliament Square in a few minutes. So the air is filled with helicopters, which you can probably hear. So I can confirm to you that Joe Biden will be in Westminster Abbey. Anyway, at this crossroads of London, at Hyde Park Corner, the capital will say farewell, and the scene, I think, is going to encapsulate the whole public rather than the private face of the funeral. Of course, her public life was concentrated here in the heart of London, as Ken was saying, on the Mall, and today she leaves it all behind. The monuments around me here trace a long history of war and peace, and the procession, by the time it reaches us here, snaking its way from the Abbey, as you've heard, will really be drawing a thread from Parliament at Whitehall, past the Palace, through the ceremonial route that was so often celebratory, but today echoes to the sound of muffled drums and funeral marches. And at the end, the national anthem is going to be played here twice. Once for the Queen, as the car takes her away, and then a few minutes later for the King, as his car follows her on the last journey to Windsor and the long goodbye.
Jim, thank you. Well, let's take you back now to Westminster Abbey, where the funeral service is due to begin in just over an hour. Chris Mason has just been speaking to Dame Kelly Holmes.
Yes, I'm outside the west door of the cathedral. A plane coming into Heathrow, actually, just passing to the right of the cathedral. What a view the passengers there must be getting right now. Let's talk to Dame Kelly Holmes, Olympian extraordinaire, served in the army as well. Dame Kelly, morning to you. You've been queuing, haven't you, in the last few days? Tell me about that, to go into Westminster Hall.
I did. I felt so compelled to do it. It was in my head so much that I felt that if I didn't, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. Anyway, I joined the queue like everybody else, and it was an amazing experience. It actually felt really joyous to be with other people who were there to pay their respects to our Queen, as we're still calling her our Queen. And I met some fantastic people in the queue, you know, of all different ages.
We're hearing the bell tolling every minute at the moment, reflecting each year of the Queen's life. That's the thing, isn't it, with the queue? The queue had a kind of life of its own. The purpose was to be in the queue as well as what you saw at the end of it.
Yeah, it really was, to say that you did it, you know. How can you not? I just wanted to give that time. I wanted to be there, and of course I've met the Queen on many occasions, but it just felt that I needed to do it. You know, and the thing was, the police that were lining the street, but I was doing press-ups with them all. I was entertaining the crowd, and it felt almost like, shouldn't I? And then we were just thinking, do you know what? This is part of our memories. We're going to remember this experience forever. So until we got into the security to go outside the hall, it was at that stage very joyous.
You've served in the army, of course. Give us some sense for those of us listening who haven't performed military service, that connection, because you could see it in the eyes of some of those former servicemen and women who were queuing, how important it is, that connection between monarch and a former member of the armed services.
There's always been a very personal relationship between the armed forces and the Queen, because she was Commander-in-Chief. So when you join, you swear allegiance to the crown, which was our Queen. So you feel that that is your duty then for your life, to kind of follow that suit. And of course all the military up until the Queen passed were pledging that allegiance, and it doesn't stop, so they now pledge the allegiance to the King, of course. So it's very special to have served and to realise how that impact has on your life, that it was for our longest serving monarchy. I mean, I feel absolutely privileged and honoured to have served my country.
You mentioned a moment ago that you'd met the Queen. I can't resist asking you about those meetings and how she was and what you talked about.
So there was very formal occasions when you've gone to Buckingham Palace, and you might have been at a reception, coming back from Olympic Games, for example. My investiture as damehood was by the Queen, so a very special moment. She's briefed very well because she asked me how my injuries were, which I was like, oh gosh, even the Queen knows I'm injured all the time. But the informal ones, the ones I remember the most, so going to the races. I remember this one occasion I had this bright blue jacket on, and she was wearing the same colour bright blue suit. So I just said, I was asked, would I like to go and meet the Queen? And of course you don't say no, do you? I was like, yes. So I went up to the Queen, she's standing there, and I went, oh man, you look wonderful. And she went, oh thank you, Dame Kelly. And everybody that around her was like sort of wanting to smile or laugh, going sniggering behind, because I've kind of like broken this protocol of just saying how wonderful. And I thought, she's human, and she shows that, and all around her. I mean, I'm only 5'4" without heels. The Queen is very small, and so, but the enormous awe that she has around her, because this is the Queen, our Queen. Those moments are very special in my mind.
Dame Kelly Holmes, pleasure to meet you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Dame Kelly Holmes there talking to Chris Mason, and she was talking about the role of the military. So
There's a new case for the #1 ladies detective agency on BBC Radio 4 Extra next week. Botswana's first ever female detective, Mara Motsway, finds herself dipping a toe into the murky world of local politics, while the agency investigates the unfair dismissal of a woman called Charity from a firm selling office furniture.
As a matter of interest, what did he say you said to him? He said that I shouted at him that if he didn't like any of our desks, then he could go and build one himself. But I would never have said that, Ma. Never. I am sure you wouldn't have. Tell me, Ma, do you have any enemies? Anybody who may really dislike you? None that I know of. There is one person who dislikes me.
What is the real reason for Charity's dismissal? Alexander McCall-Smith's The #1 Ladies Detective Agency begins on Radio 4 Extra and BBC Sounds next Monday morning at 10 and again at 3.
This is BBC Radio 4 Extra.
11 o'clock, hello, Jim Lee here, and about to bring you the Friedland Files, in which Michael Friedland shares private recordings revealing some of the lesser-known stories of some of the great stars of stage and screen. Jim Kelly, Morgan Wise, Fred Astaire and James Stewart among them. And later here on 4 Extra, John MacDonald explores the strange backstory to the infamous 1975 Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier fight, the thriller in Manila, at 2:30. First, in a programme that was made to mark the 90th Academy Awards ceremony in
the central principle of Islam. So that effectively you are a Muslim. So that effectively, yes, I would now be prepared to say that.
I don't think any of us really believed it. Everyone thought, oh, we're just going to try that now to get out of it.
Rushdie hadn't told anyone about his plans to reaffirm his faith. And so his friend, Hanif Qureshi, heard the news over the radio like everyone else.
No, I didn't think he was sincere about it. I didn't think sincerity was important at all. Why would you want to be sincere? You just say what you need to say and hope that these bearded ones will bugger off.
I remember Hisham being overjoyed.
This is Elaine, Hisham al-Essawi's wife.
And he came to tell us that Salman Rushdie is now a Muslim. And I was happy. Hisham was delighted. I was sceptical.
Close friend Bill Buford was hosting Rushdie over Christmas.
That was a complicated day. He was in a bad moment, I would say. I think it was a moment of loneliness and doubt and exhaustion.
Years later, Rushdie recorded a diary entry he made a week after he reaffirmed his faith.
Ever since I made my compromise with the Muslim scholars on Christmas Eve, I've been feeling sick. Sick at heart and in my stomach. This isn't me. It isn't me. If I speak to my sister, she says, "What have you done? Have you gone mad?"
Salman Rushdie didn't get the reaction he hoped for from the Muslim world. Most people who were hostile towards him when he was an atheist remained hostile even after he said he was a Muslim. And within weeks, Rushdie was backtracking. At that point, he turned on the dentist, saying he'd manipulated him when he was at his lowest ebb. He called Essawi the kind of Muslim who forces his wife to sit at his feet, cutting his toenails.
He made his break with the dentist and left those well-manicured toenails behind forever.
Now Rushdie turned his attention to the paperback edition of the Satanic Verses. But Penguin, his publisher, was reluctant to publish it, in case they stirred things up again. In the end, the head of Penguin, Peter Mayer, called a meeting of senior staff to decide what to do.
We took a vote and it divided entirely equally, as it were, 13 votes in favour of publication, 13 against.
James was a Penguin employee at the time. We're not using his real name because he remains a target of the fatwa himself. He remembers people making persuasive arguments both for and against publishing the paperback edition.
And we had a break, we went back, there was more discussions, we took another vote, and one person had changed her mind. She voted for publication this time. This decision was taken, and the idea was that we would publish very, very quickly. I went to bed and was awoken at some point early in the morning by Peter Mayer, who was flying back to New York to say, "Have you heard the news? There was a Penguin book store within Liberties, and somebody had thrown a small incendiary device over it." And Peter said to me, "I can't do it. I can't take the responsibility of other people's lives for a book."
His fear would turn out to be well-founded.
Next time on Fatwa.
It's going to take more than 5 minutes, he said. They're trying to kill me.
Episode 9. I've got a problem here.
It's a miracle that he survived. I think it was a shocking picture of a new time, of a new world.
Fatwa was produced by Chloe Hatch-Mateo. Originally broadcast in 2019, you can listen to the series from the beginning on BBC Sounds. As we'll hear shortly in the news, Britain's third woman Prime Minister is just getting her feet under the desk at number 10. What sort of leader will she be? Well, that's a question for Woman's Hour, coming up in a couple of minutes.
As the curtain begins to fall on another year at the BBC Proms, relive an incredible summer of live music with BBC Sounds. Recapture every moment of tension, vitality, and joy as we embark on our final adventure. And you're invited. The last night of the Proms on Saturday night at 7:15 on BBC Sounds.
BBC Radio 4.
BBC News at 10 o'clock. Liz Truss has chaired her first cabinet meeting since becoming Prime Minister. She's made tackling rising energy bills a top priority. It's understood that a typical household's annual gas and electricity bill could be capped at around £2,500. The precise details of any support for businesses has yet to be confirmed. Paul Johnson, the director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, says a blanket approach is wrong.
The majority of the money will go to better off people who use more energy. So this is very poorly targeted, and not only is it poorly targeted, it also means that we don't see, and including better off people, don't see the full price signal that actually across the world people need to see. I mean, the reason that gas prices are so high is because there's less gas around, and then if the world doesn't use less gas over the next year, then we're going to run out.
Around the cabinet table were some of Miss Truss's closest allies, including Kwasi Kwarteng, who's become the Chancellor, and Therese Coffey, who's the new Health Secretary. But the Prime Minister is already facing questions from some Tory MPs about the widespread promotion of loyalists. 4 men arrested in connection with the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell have been given conditional bail. Police in Liverpool say they still need to build up a strong evidential picture. President Putin has warned that Russia could try to limit the countries that can receive grain shipments from Ukraine. He claimed most of the ships that have left the country under a UN deal have been travelling to developed countries. Kiev says it does not see any reason to amend the agreement. The FBI reportedly found documents containing information about a foreign power's nuclear and defence capabilities when it searched President Trump's house. The Washington Post says a total of 11,000 items were seized during last month's raid. Scientists studying wild chimpanzees in Uganda have found that each animal has their own signature drumming style. The chimps use tree roots to hammer out messages to each other over long distances. BBC News.
BBC Radio 4. It's time for Woman's Hour with Emma Barnett.
Good morning and welcome to the programme. The country is now being run by not one, but 2 women. Liz Truss as Prime Minister and her great pal and political colleague, Theresa Coffey, as Deputy Prime Minister, also the new Health Secretary. As the 4th since last year of June, we have had 4 Health Secretaries, and also looking at the number of Prime Ministers shortly and what they're going to be offering us will come to my guests. But Theresa Coffey spoke to my colleagues on the Today programme earlier today, and this is what she had to say.
We know this is a challenge. What I've seen from the Prime Minister is actually how excited and focused she is to deliver, and that's why I've supported Liz for many reasons, not just because she's my friend, far from it. It's because I think she's the person who can get on, get the grip, and make sure that we deliver for the people of this country.
While some have talked about an old girls' club replacing the old boys' club, others care little for the personnel or for the fact that for the first time none of the highest offices of state are held by a white man. The hunger, instead, is to know what the Prime Minister will do with her new power. Prime Minister Truss has met her new cabinet this morning, and dominating the conversation like COVID and Brexit before it is one topic: energy prices. Tomorrow we will have more of an idea of what her plan is in this regard, but first at 12 today she'll be at the dispatch box in the House of Commons for her first Prime Minister's questions, across from Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party. Where are you at this morning? Excitement in your house about a new Prime Minister, a new chapter, benefit of the doubt being given? You could have, of course, voted for her if you're a member of the Conservative Party, or would have done if you were given the chance. Or do you feel more along the lines of the Daily Mirror newspaper headline writers this morning? After 12 years of Conservative rule, beleaguered and impatient for Liz Truss to fix the Britain her party and the 3 previous Conservative Prime Ministers, as they put it, broke. Well, you can text me here at the programme. The number is 84844. Text will be charged your standard message rate. On social media, at BBC Woman's Hour. Email me through the Woman's Hour website. Oh, go on, try sending me a voice note on WhatsApp or a message through WhatsApp on 03700 100 444. You may wish to use Wi-Fi because data charges can apply. Also on today's programme, we'll be hearing how it is to leave a strict religious community in this country and survive life on the outside. One woman tells all very bravely too. The untold stories of haggitude, hags with attitude, a psychologist and author on how to become an elder, not elderly, and the female entrepreneur who came to this country as a refugee from Afghanistan as a child, who just can't seem to stop winning awards. All that to come. But first, a new Prime Minister, the 3rd female Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, is installed in Britain's most famous London cul-de-sac. Liz Truss, of course the former Foreign Secretary and Women and Equalities Minister, today has her first full day in number 10. We asked to speak to the new Prime Minister this morning, but as I mentioned, it is a busy day. Last time I spoke to Liz Truss, it was actually after the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe from imprisonment in Iran, and during that exchange on this programme, I asked her this. Perhaps I could ask you to commit, with time when it isn't as frantic, to come and do a phone-in here with the listeners of Woman's Hour on what women would like, because they do have a lot of questions for you that we aren't able to get through today.
I'd really like to do that, Emma.
Thank you very much. I'll take that as a yes when your diary is freer. Well, the invite is still open. We would love for her to come, especially now she's Prime Minister. But of course, we're also waiting to hear who will be the new Women and Equalities Minister. Some of those junior positions not yet appointed, or maybe they have been. As I'm talking, Camilla Tominey, a woman in the know, Associate Editor at the Daily Telegraph. Have we missed a lot in the last 5 minutes? Things are moving.
My phone here, Emma, to see if there's any more ministerial appointments that I can't see. As you know, though, the Wi-Fi is notoriously bad in the Millbank BBC studio, so I haven't got anything through yet.
That's our Westminster bit. People don't know Millbank. How's she doing so far? Are you feeling inspired at the Daily Telegraph? Are you all pumped up?
Well, we've done quite a pumped up front page, and actually I think it was a pretty solid performance yesterday. It wasn't going to start winning any awards for oratory, but then maybe people are actually quite welcoming of somebody who's a complete break from Boris Johnson. We had him being quite boosterish in the morning and almost pretending like Britain didn't have any problems. And then Liz Truss emerging in the afternoon, basically setting out an agenda to deal with what is the biggest and most sort of troublesome in tray that a Prime Minister has seen since the 1970s. So maybe it's not the time for sort of joking and clowning around, and a degree of seriousness is needed.
She does make a lot of, in fact, I think we put together a bit of a montage of her saying this, that she gets the job done. That seems to be what she, and then we heard her friend Therese Coffey this morning saying very similarly.
Yes, and she's all about delivery, right? So some comparisons have been made to Deliveroo. And obviously, she's already a hate figure among the Twitterati, but that was always going to be the case. The interesting thing about Truss, I think, is she cares less what people think of her than Boris Johnson ever did. She's not necessarily a pleaser. I think the idea is for her maybe not to be liked by swathes of the country, but like Thatcher, to at least be respected for having an ideological vision and also a clarity of purpose when it comes to policy making. I mean, this idea of expediting what we think is going to be a cap on energy bills at £2,500, probably announcing that tomorrow rather than next week, shows that she understands that there's urgency needed, not least because we're 2 years out from another general election, and let's face it, the Tories are behind in the polls.
Is it true that she's good at delivery? I mean, I'm thinking back, she's had a lot of roles in short succession. especially if you look at international trade, which interestingly has gone to Kemi Badenoch, the other woman who was doing extremely well in that race.